Hey y'all, I'm Jonathan McRae, one of the caretakers of Silver Run Forest Farm. And today we're going to talk about nettle, specifically stinging nettle, not to be confused with the native wood nettle. So I want to talk about how we propagate this plant, how we tend it, take care of it, and how we use it. And show you a little bit more about how to ID this plant. And this is one of the many beautiful and useful plants we grow in our nursery. Silver Run Forest Farm is a riparian nursery and folk school that's focused on agroforestry, watershed health, and restorative justice. And we see stinging nettle as one of the most powerful medicinal plants we're partnering with. So I want to introduce you to all the creative things you can do with them. I'm sitting down in a nettle patch. I'm surrounded by blackberries sitting under a maple. We're kind of in a little wet, low spot where water's flowing down through the landscape to Cub Run, the creek that's flowing behind me, and the nursery's all up through here. This is a really sweet spot to plant stinging nettle. They love moist woodland edges and riparian zones. Riparian means growing along a waterway, on the bank of a waterway. And I'm kind of being careful how close I'm getting right now because stinging nettle, as the name implies, is a pretty prickly plant with all these small, like needle-like hairs that grow on the stem. So I'm going to wear gloves when I start cutting. It probably would have been wise of me to wear long sleeves. So I'm going to feel a little bit of that invigorating sting while I'm in here cutting. So we're using nettle as an amazing riparian medicine, and also the fibrous root system, which we'll see in a little bit when I dig some up to transplant, does an incredible job of preventing erosion. So it's such an amazing plant to prevent erosion, to grow medicine, and a little bit of a natural fence given all the natural needles that form on the stem of the plant. And we're going to look at cutting this so we can dry it and have a bunch of dried nettle for the winter. Got our faces right down here next to our friend stinging nettle. I just reached in and grabbed that hairy stem, but I flattened the needles so I'm not getting stung right now, but I'll wear gloves when I cut. If you want to avoid the discomfort of having your hands and arms feel like they're a little on fire, then we'll wear gloves. But here's a close-up shot of the nettle. Pretty similar looking to the native wood nettle that's growing all around Appalachian woodlands, but the main difference is to see these prickly needle-like hairs sticking out of the stem. They have histamines. That's what causes the skin inflammation when you get stung a little bit. Opposite leaves coming out of the stem, which is pretty round. They harden off into kind of a woody stem, but you can see on the fresh growth how leafy and easy to break, easy to rip and cut it is. So most of that could be used when you're cooking, and it's easy when it's dried to pull the leaves off. I'm going to start cutting this nettle. If I wanted it fresh, if I just wanted to come out of the house to a spot where I have nettle planted and pick a few to throw into some eggs or into a soup, this young stuff that's got it's kind of leafy, real fleshy sort of thing, I could just rip off wearing gloves so I'm not getting stung, and I could just throw this whole thing in a cast iron skillet or a pot or something like that. But I want to get a little bit more so I can bundle it up and hang it to dry, because I want to have it in the winter for teas, to mix into soups, have it in the winter for mixing into eggs as well. It's such a medicinal plant, which we'll talk more about later, all the stuff that's kind of packed into nettle. And I've got several tools that could help me. I'm gonna wear these gloves so I don't get stung. And then I'm also wearing, or got a Felco set of pruners. So this is a really, really nice tool to reach in on some of the small stuff, or if I wanna get kind of this top growth, snip that off. But I also have some long-handled pruning shears that I can get a whole bunch at one time. So I'm going to use these, and that way my hands, since I'm not wearing long sleeves, I'm not going to get beat up by this wonderful, very well boundaried plant. I just got a whole bunch at one time. There's a little bit of other stuff mixed in, maybe a little bit of the blackberry that's growing in here. Blackberry leaves are really medicinal too, so it's fine if they get mixed in a little bit. And that, for a home scale, that's fine. If you're thinking you might want to plant out nettle commercially and think about offering that more, definitely makes sense to try to plant it and mulch really well so you don't have other stuff coming through and mixing in. And really considering where you put nettle because they like to move, they like to spread. All this that is in here was just one little row of a few small rootlets, small clumps of root that we stuck in here. And then over the past 2 years, they're moving underground with rhizomes, roots that spread just right under the surface of the soil. So they're starting to move and form a whole patch, a whole thicket in here, which is such a wonderful habit. That's what we want. That's part of the stream restoring benefit of nettle, is to have these web-like roots that are spreading and holding the soil from eroding when water's moving. But it can be a little frustrating if you plant this on a garden edge or a pathway next to a path, or a little edge next to a path, and they're starting to lean over and spread into your walking path, because it becomes an edge that starts to encroach on your walking space. So a good reason to get in and try to prune and harvest a little bit more regularly. I'm gonna start bundling these up with this twine. I could do one big bundle, but I think I'm gonna do a few smaller ones just for the airflow, just to make sure that air can get through everything, dry it out a little bit more quickly, a little bit more evenly, and then hang it all up in the barn out of the light, and just so it dries over time through airflow. That would preserve a little bit more of the nutrition so it's not in direct sunlight. And it's a pretty messy little bundle. I'm not too worried about the orientation, like the up or down of the plant, because I'm just gonna grab the stem, and the hairs won't sting me at that point when it's all dried, and I can just strip all the leaves off, so it won't really matter which direction they are. There might be a much neater, much more elegant way to do this, but I'm just gonna put the twine around here. This is where having long sleeves and long pants would have been helpful, because I can feel the sting right now a little bit. Get this pretty tight here so that as it dries and compresses, it's not going to slip out very easily. Do one little loop and take the gloves off for this part, even though there's blackberries and horse nettle and tons of other stuff in here. Tie a little loop in here. All right, got this loop on here, and now we can hang that up in the barn. We just hung our fresh bundles of nettle here in the barn, out of the sun. They get indirect light, so we're not losing as much of the nutritional value if it was out in the direct sun. And this is what we're gonna get here pretty soon. This is something we cut and dried a couple months ago this summer. And we're gonna stuff these into mason jars as a way to store it, because we wanna use the nettle all winter when it's not growing. There's so much medicinal benefit packed into these plants. Fresh and kind of cooked in to eggs or soups, it tastes a little bit like a richer, nuttier, earthier spinach. Real unique flavor all of its own. And there's so many medicinal qualities, like it's packed with iron, has a whole lot of vitamins. There's research through Howard University on using nettle to support people with diabetes. There's a whole lot more in our plant description on our website if you want to check that out. But we love using it mixed in soups, mixed into sautés, lasagnas, baked goods kind of thing. But it's also a really nutritious tea. The flavor is pretty intense by itself, but you can mix it with other things or add a little honey. Some people love that kind of rich green flavor to it. But it supports people who are lactating, or to encourage more lactation for breastfeeding and fortify the breast milk for infants. So it does so many different things just by being itself, and has been used for thousands of years by communities all around the world. This variety of nettle, stinging nettle, which is a Latin name is Urtica dioica, is from parts of North Africa, parts of Asia, parts of Eastern and Southern Europe, and has been pretty naturalized here in the United States and North America. Spreading along waterways like we were talking about through the root system. So there's so many different benefits to this dried. I'm not getting stung right now. It's pretty light, a little bit more tingly than stinging now that it's dried out. So we'll just pack this into jars and have plenty of nettle for the winter. So we're back in the nettle patch. Here I'm gonna dig up some and move them, because they're, like I said earlier, they're starting to spread everywhere. And that's a great benefit of nettle, especially if you're a nursery, because they're just propagating themselves. We don't have to do a whole lot of work for them. So this is probably where we're going to come in this fall and spring to dig up clumps that will fulfill orders that we're getting right now through our website. Nettle moves in those rhizomes I was talking about earlier. They're roots that spread right under the surface of the soil. So that's what I want to lift up as some of these clumps. And now I can see what I'm working with since we cut out a lot of the leafy growth for drying. So just in this one area, there's several crops that we're getting out of a little riparian woodland. The medicine, we could use them as mulch. We also use a lot of the nettle and compost teas in our nursery. We mix them in with dandelions, with comfrey, with yarrow, with burdock, with a lot of different herbs that are growing around. Then we cut a whole bunch of nettle and brew them with a fish tank aerator in a big batch of water for like 24 or 48 hours and spray that all over our nursery plants. So many things you can do with nettle. So I'm gonna pop a few of these out and we're gonna plant new areas along the creek. You can hear that rip in there. That's the roots popping. There's so many of them in here. Gotten that loose enough. Wearing gloves so I can grab the base here. Pop that up and shake out the soil. And that's enough to transplant. That'll move really easily. I'll try to get a little bit more on the next one. But I popped out some of these roots. Here you can see these fibrous roots that are spreading underground. That'll transplant really easily, even right now, even though it's pretty hot. And in the growing season, because we cut back all the leaf, it's not gonna lose moisture through the leaf at this point. It's called evapotranspiration. That's a big issue with transplanting in the growing season. You just lose a lot of moisture. But there's not a lot of leaf on this. We can plant this whole thing with just a little bit sticking out underground, and this is gonna take off even now and grow up until the dormant season. So I'll dig up a little bit more here so we have enough to move. There's a good example of those fibrous roots that are holding that whole clump of soil. So that's the benefit that they're offering on a stream bank, to keep all that soil from eroding. They're clumping it together with this kind of web net-like system of roots. My forest farm partner Cornelius prepped this spot here for us yesterday, right along the stream bank of Cub Run. We're sort of in a little Appalachian orchard here with black walnut behind me. This is one of the big trees that we tap every winter for sap. And then spice bush is behind me here. We've got black raspberry coming up all over the place. So there's a whole community here right along the stream bank that we're gonna invite stinging nettle into. And I think all these other root systems are gonna help keep stinging nettle in check a little bit. Nettle likes to take up a lot of room, but so does black raspberry, and the fibrous roots of spice bush are under here as well. So we might be able to keep nettle just a little bit more contained here, favoring down the stream bank to hold the soil from eroding down into the creek with heavy rains and storms and that kind of thing. This is a really sweet spot for nettle. We've got some light coming through, but plenty of shade, which nettle does well with. This would be a pretty challenging location if you're interested in growing a lot of nettle for wholesale, say like to medicinal spots, like apothecaries, to different herbalists, or to restaurants that would want to use nettle. Mostly just because it is a little bit limited light, and there is so much else growing in here. Black raspberry is going to want to get into nettle. So when you're harvesting, like I was earlier, the blackberry was coming up through, just makes it hard to do a whole bunch at one time very efficiently or elegantly. This is amazing for stream restoration, for riparian restoration, for home or community scale. If you just want nettle to flavor your life in the winter and have a little bit of fresh picking and know the root system is doing good work when you're ignoring nettle. But if you want to do a whole bunch of nettle bulk at one time, I'd suggest finding a little bit more open area, mulching pretty well, and then regularly tending nettle, cutting it back to encourage more leafy growth over time. And that way you can get arm loads wearing long sleeves at one time. So we're going to pop these root systems in the ground and show how quick and easy it is to get a lot of nettle established at one time. I like this big hefty clump of nettle. This is going to do really well, and I love the yellow root systems on this. They're going to spread through here. If I were going to offer this in our nursery, I'd dip this in a bunch of water to get the soil off. And then this would be an amazing clump to send to somebody, because you could tease apart several of these sprouts or these stems coming out and have one nettle to plant and another one. So in this one clump, there's probably 4 or 5 nettle divisions that you could do. I'm just gonna plant them all together because I wanna really encourage this to do well here. I'm just gonna pull the sod back a little bit, stick that down in. Done. It's that easy. It's so simple to get nettle established. I'll just stick a few more in here for safety, knowing that they're gonna spread into each other. Get one a little bit closer down onto the bank here. And earlier I mentioned planting at this time of year isn't the best thing for most plants with all the leaves coming up because you're losing moisture. That one I just stuck in the ground had a little bit more growth that I didn't cut earlier. So I'll just pop this off. And that's gonna do really well now, covered with soil and fungally wood chips right next to black walnut. Nettle won't have an issue with that, so we're gonna have a whole nother patch here next year. Just cut this stem off of the nettle root clumps that I stuck in the ground underneath this black walnut. And just think about all the different uses of nettle. We've talked about the culinary uses. We've talked about the riparian restoration, healing aspects with how the roots form this incredible web or net. But you can also use the inner bark or the phloem, which is the part of the underneath in the stem that moves the sugars produced through photosynthesis down through the stem into the root system. You can use those as a type of fiber to weave clothes. It's got a harvest similar to flax from each stem. Can't speak too intelligently to the process since I've never done it before, but just so you know, you can make fabric out of the fiber of nettle, sewing clothes and weaving, which is another just amazing benefit of this wonderful plant that grows along waterways.